The silent drift. In the cold, dark emptiness of space, a forgotten warship floated aimlessly. It had been drifting for centuries, lost to time, abandoned and ignored by everyone. No one knew who had left it there or why. The ship's massive hull was covered with dust and scratches, evidence of its long journey through the stars. It looked like a ghost of a past civilization, a relic from an ancient time. No signals, no life forms, just silence. The ship's name, once proudly displayed on its outer shell, was now almost unreadable. The letters had worn away, leaving only faint traces of what it once was. Inside, everything was dark, cold, and still. No engines hummed, no crew moved through the hallways. The lights had long since gone out, and the walls were covered in a thick layer of dust. The ship seemed to be nothing more than an abandoned shell, lost and forgotten. But that wasn't the whole story. Deep inside the ship, in the heart of its command center, something strange was happening. The ship, which had been silent for so long, suddenly flickered to life. It wasn't much, just a faint hum, barely noticeable at first, but it was enough to set off a chain of events that no one could have predicted. The ship's ancient systems, long dormant, began to stir. It was as if the ship had woken up from a deep slumber. Across the galaxy, many were unaware of the warship's sudden revival. It was far off the beaten path, lost in the remote regions of space. Only a few ships ever passed through the area, and even fewer had any reason to notice this relic. But one ship did. It was a small exploration vessel called Icarus, a ship sent out to map the uncharted areas of space. The crew of the Icarus had no idea that their mission would lead them to the biggest discovery of their lives. Captain Ilara stood on the bridge of the Icarus, staring at the radar screen. The ship was far from any known civilization, drifting through uncharted space. Everything seemed normal, until the faint signal appeared. At first, it was just a blip, something so small that most sensors would have ignored it. But Ilara wasn't like most captains. She had an eye for details, and something about that signal caught her attention. "It's coming from deep in the sector," she muttered to herself. Could it be? She didn't finish the thought. She didn't need to. The thought alone was enough to spark her curiosity. She ordered the crew to plot a course toward the signal. As they got closer, the faint signal grew stronger. It wasn't much, just a single, weak distress call, barely audible, but it was enough. Someone had left it behind, and now it was calling for help. Or was it? Ilara couldn't be sure. The message was too old to understand fully, and the source was too far from any known civilization. Still, something told her this was worth investigating. The Icarus slowly approached the silent warship, its crew on high alert. No one knew what they would find. The warship was ancient, probably older than any ship they had ever encountered. Its systems were long gone, and yet the faint signal kept calling. What could it mean? As the Icarus came closer, Ilara could see the ship in all its eerie stillness. It was massive, its dark hull looming in the void like some kind of sleeping giant. The ship seemed lifeless, empty, but there was something about it, something that made Ilara's pulse race with anticipation. What secrets did it hold? Why had it been left here, alone for so long? Ilara ordered her crew to prepare to board the warship. They would need to be careful. This was a ship no one had entered in centuries, and no one knew what dangers it might hold. They couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The crew of the Icarus began to suit up, gathering their equipment and preparing for whatever they might face. Ilara stood at the front of the group, her mind racing with questions. Who had built this ship? Why had it been abandoned? And most importantly, what kind of technology might they find on board? If the ship had once been a powerful warship, it could hold secrets that could change the galaxy. The air around them seemed thick with tension as they boarded the ship. The once impressive warship now looked like a shadow of its former self. The metal walls were covered in rust, and the corridors were empty, silent. It was as though the ship had never been used. But Ilara knew better. This ship had once been a force to be reckoned with, and now it was waiting for something, or someone, to come along and awaken it from its long slumber. As the crew made their way deeper into the ship, the silence around them grew oppressive. The dark hallways seemed to stretch on forever, and every corner felt like it might hide some ancient danger. The deeper they went, the more uneasy they felt. The ship's systems, though old and decayed, still held a faint pulse of life. Then, without warning, a flicker of light appeared. It was weak at first, just a small glimmer, but it was enough to catch their attention. The lights on the ship began to come back on, one by one. It was as if the ship itself had begun to wake up. Slowly, the hum of its ancient engines started to echo through the corridors. The ship was coming to life. "What have we awakened?" Ilara whispered under her breath. The answer to that question was something they would soon discover. But for now, all they could do was press on. The warship was not as abandoned as it seemed. Something was waiting for them inside, something powerful. And the galaxy was about to learn the truth. The crew of the Icarus moved cautiously through the dark corridors of the ancient warship. The once proud vessel now felt like a ghost ship, its walls echoing with the whispers of a forgotten time. The lights flickered as if uncertain of their purpose, casting long shadows that danced like living things. The hum of the engines grew louder, reverberating through the ship's bones. Something deep within the ship was coming to life, and Ilara could feel it in her bones. She glanced at her crew, their faces tense with a mix of excitement and fear. They had no idea what lay ahead, but they had to continue. The faint signal they had picked up was coming from the ship's command center. Whatever secrets the warship held, they were buried there. Ilara led the way, her footsteps soft on the metallic floor, her hand resting lightly on the side of the ship, as if to steady herself. The deeper they ventured into the vessel, the more the air felt charged, as if something was watching them. Every creak of the ship, every groan of its ancient walls seemed to carry with it a warning. "It's too quiet," Lieutenant Garrett said in a low voice, his hand tight on his weapon. "I don't like it." Ilara nodded but said nothing. She had the same feeling. The ship was alive, but not in the way they were used to. The Icarus had technology. It had systems that could be turned on and off with the press of a button. But this ship, this warship, felt different. It felt like it had a purpose, like it had been waiting for something to happen. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the ship, causing everyone to freeze in place. The noise came from deeper within the warship, and it was followed by the distinct sound of heavy machinery moving. Something was powering up. The crew quickly huddled together, weapons at the ready, as the ship seemed to awaken around them. "Stay sharp," Ilara commanded, her voice steady despite the unease rising within her. "Move out." They advanced, their steps quickening as the ship seemed to come alive in ways they hadn't anticipated. The once still ship was now humming with energy, its systems coming online one by one. Lights flickered to life in bursts of blue and green, and the temperature began to rise as the engines came back to life. The hum became a deep rumble, almost like the ship was breathing, or perhaps waking from a deep slumber. When they reached the command center, Ilara's heart skipped a beat. The massive doors were open, and inside, the control consoles flickered with life. Screens came to life, displaying cryptic symbols and unknown languages. The room had an eerie feeling, as though it had been frozen in time, untouched for centuries. The only sign of life was the strange, quiet hum that seemed to vibrate through the walls. "Report," Ilara whispered, stepping forward cautiously. Lieutenant Garrett moved to the nearest console, scanning the screen. "There's no sign of anyone alive, Captain. The ship's records are corrupted, but we're getting some power readings. The engines are fully online, but there's something strange." "Strange how?" Ilara asked, her voice tense. "It's like the ship's energy is being rerouted. It's as if something's using all the power in specific areas. I don't think the ship is fully automated. It's like it's being controlled by something, or someone. Ilara's pulse quickened. This was no ordinary warship. There was something more to this ship than simple forgotten technology. It was as though the ship itself was alive, its energy being drawn towards something or someone. She stepped closer to the central command console. The screen flickered again, and for a brief moment, Ilara saw a set of coordinates flash across the screen. They weren't in any known star system. The coordinates led to an uncharted sector of space, a place where no ships had gone for centuries. The coordinates were too precise, too deliberate. "What is this?" Ilara muttered, running her fingers over the cold surface of the console. "What are we dealing with here?" Suddenly, the lights in the room flickered, and the hum of the ship grew louder. Ilara felt a strange chill in the air. It was as if the ship was speaking to her, communicating, though she didn't understand how. Her crew felt it too. Lieutenant Garrett backed away from the console, his face pale. "It's not just a ship," Garrett whispered. "It's something else, something that shouldn't be here." Before Ilara could respond, a new sound broke the silence. It was a voice, faint but clear, coming from deep within the ship's communication system. It was ancient, distorted by time, but unmistakably human. "Warning, warning," the voice said, crackling with static. "Do not awaken, the relic." Ilara froze. The voice echoed through the command center, sending a shiver down her spine. The warning was clear, and yet they had already done what they were warned not to. They had awakened the ship, and now whatever secrets it held were about to be revealed. "Do you think the message is from the original crew?" Lieutenant Garrett asked, his voice shaky. "It's possible," Ilara said, her mind racing. "But why would they leave a warning like that? And why leave the ship here, abandoned for so long?" The warning continued, louder now, more urgent. "Turn back, before it is too late. The relic, it lives." The message cut off abruptly, leaving a heavy silence in its wake. The crew stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. The ship had woken, but now it seemed as if the real story was just beginning. The relic had been awakened, but what did it mean? And more importantly, what kind of power had been hidden on this ancient warship? As Ilara turned to face her crew, she knew that the galaxy was about to learn something it wasn't ready for. Whatever this warship had once been, it was no longer just an abandoned relic. It was a weapon, a force that no one had seen in centuries. And it was waiting for the right moment to strike. The silence in the command center grew heavier as Ilara and her crew tried to process the message they had just heard. The word relic echoed in Ilara's mind, sending chills down her spine. What could it possibly mean? A warning, a threat, or a relic of unimaginable power? There were too many questions, and not enough answers. For a few moments, no one spoke. The crew stood frozen, staring at the now silent console, each person lost in their own thoughts. The lights of the ship flickered once more, and the hum of its engines became a steady vibration beneath their feet, as if the ship was alive, listening. Ilara took a deep breath and broke the silence. "Lieutenant Garrett, check the ship's systems again. I want to know exactly what's happening here. Why is the energy being diverted to specific sectors of the ship?" Garrett nodded quickly, his face still pale from the strange, eerie warning. He moved to the central console again and began typing rapidly, his fingers flying over the keys. The rest of the crew watched him, their anxiety growing with each passing second. The ship felt like it was holding its breath. And so did they. "I'm getting something," Garrett said, his voice trained. "The energy's being focused on one area. It's a chamber deep within the ship, a place that doesn't appear on any of the old blueprints. It looks like it's been sealed off for centuries." "Sealed off," Ilara repeated, raising an eyebrow. "Then why are we getting a power surge from that part of the ship?" "I don't know, Captain," Garrett replied, his brow furrowing. "But it's almost as if the power is coming from something alive, something in that chamber." Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. She exchanged a look with her crew, They had no choice but to investigate. The warning had been clear, but there was something about this place that drew them in, something they couldn't resist. There was too much at stake. "We need to see this for ourselves," Ilara said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "Prepare to move out. We head for the chamber." The crew nodded and began making preparations. As they moved through the ship's corridors, the atmosphere became even more oppressive. The flickering lights cast strange shadows along the walls, and the air felt thick with tension. The deeper they went, the more the ship seemed to pulse with energy, as if it was alive, waiting for something. The walls were covered in ancient markings, symbols they didn't recognize. Ilara ran her fingers across them, but she couldn't make sense of the strange language. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. She felt as though she was walking through a place that had never meant to be discovered, a place that had been hidden for a reason. Finally, they arrived at the sealed door. The chamber lay just beyond it. The energy readings had spiked just before they reached the door, and Ilara could feel the weight of the moment settling on her. This was it, the heart of the ship, the place where the power was being drawn. Ilara stepped forward and placed her hand on the control panel. The door seemed to hesitate for a moment before it slowly began to open with a groan, revealing the room inside. What lay beyond was not what Ilara had expected. The chamber was vast, stretching far beyond what she had imagined. It was filled with strange, pulsating energy, and in the center of the room stood something that took her breath away. A massive, dormant construct that appeared to be part machine, part organic. It was an ancient weapon, its form both beautiful and terrifying, a relic of an era long past. The construct was shaped like a gigantic humanoid figure, but its surface was covered in strange markings and alien designs. Its eyes, or what appeared to be eyes, glowed faintly in the dim light, a soft, eerie green that pulsed with the rhythm of the ship's energy. "What is that?" Lieutenant Garrett whispered, his voice trembling. "Is it alive?" Ilara wasn't sure, but she had a feeling in her gut that it was. This relic, this weapon, it was the source of the power. The ship was nothing more than a vessel, a prison for this ancient being. And now that it had been awakened, the galaxy was about to face something they couldn't possibly understand. "It looks like some kind of battle automaton," Ilara said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's more than that. This is a weapon, but also something alive. It was built to destroy, to fight. And it's been waiting here all this time." As Ilara studied the construct, she noticed something even more unsettling. At the center of its chest was a glowing core, pulsating with a strange energy. It was the source of the ship's power, and it seemed to be drawing energy from the ship itself. "This is what the message warned us about," Garrett said, his voice filled with disbelief. "This thing is the relic. It's not just a machine. It's a weapon, a sentient weapon." Suddenly, the construct's eyes flickered, and the room trembled as a deep, resonating hum filled the air. The power in the chamber surged, and the glowing core at the center of the construct brightened, casting an eerie light across the room. The crew backed away, fear creeping into their hearts. The relic was waking, and it wasn't happy. Ilara's mind raced. They had awoken something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. This was no ordinary warship. It was the home of a weapon unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The relic was alive, and it was angry. As the hum grew louder, Ilara realized that they were not just dealing with a ship or an ancient weapon. They had uncovered the beginning of something far larger, something that had the power to change the fate of the galaxy forever. And they had just awakened it. The room was vibrating. The sound was unlike anything Ilara had ever heard before, a deep, guttural hum that seemed to come from every corner of the chamber. It reverberated through her bones, sending an uncomfortable chill down her spine. The construct's eyes now blazed with an intense, greenish glow that pierced the darkness. The very air around it seemed to crackle with energy. The crew instinctively backed away, but Ilara remained frozen, Her eyes locked on the massive humanoid machine. There was no doubt about it. It was waking up. The message, the warnings, everything was happening now. This was the moment the galaxy had feared for centuries. "Captain," Garrett's voice trembled. "What are we supposed to do? It's not just a relic. It's alive." Ilara didn't answer him immediately. She was focused on the construct in front of her, studying its movements. The power it radiated was unlike anything she had ever felt before, and it filled her with both awe and fear. Slowly, the construct's massive limbs began to stir. The creaking sound of ancient metal shifting echoed through the room, and Ilara could see the strange runes carved into its body begin to glow brighter. She could feel the energy in the chamber building, almost like a storm about to break loose. The construct was no longer just a relic of the past. It was something else entirely, something far more dangerous. "What do we do now?" Garrett repeated, his voice now tinged with panic. "If that thing gets loose, the entire ship could be destroyed." Ilara turned to face him. "We need to find a way to shut it down. Whatever that core is, it's powering the entire ship. If we can't stop it, we may not make it out alive." "But how?" Garrett asked. "This thing is ancient. We don't even know how it works." "I don't know," Ilara said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. "But we have to try. This ship wasn't abandoned by chance. Someone hid it here for a reason." Just as Ilara spoke, the construct let out a low, rumbling growl. The walls of the chamber began to shake as if the ship itself were protesting. The hum of energy increased, and the construct's massive hands began to twitch, its fingers flexing as though testing its strength for the first time in centuries. It was alive, and it was angry. Ilara glanced over her shoulder at her crew. They were all tense, their weapons ready, but none of them had any idea what they were up against. This was no ordinary ship, and this was no ordinary enemy. They were facing something that shouldn't exist, a weapon that had been lost to time, now reborn and full of fury. "Lieutenant Garrett, check the ship's systems again," Ilara ordered. "Look for any kind of failsafe, anything that can stop it." Garrett quickly moved to the console, his fingers working fast, but the readings on his screen were all over the place. The ship's systems were fluctuating wildly as the construct powered up. "I can't access most of the systems, Captain," Garrett said, frustration clear in his voice. "This thing is locking me out." Suddenly, the construct's eyes flashed brighter, and its chest began to glow even more intensely. The room trembled violently, and the force of the power surge knocked Ilara and her crew to the ground. A loud, deafening sound filled the chamber, as if the relic itself was unleashing its fury. The core at the center of the machine began to spin rapidly, releasing a pulse of energy that sent shockwaves through the ship. "Captain, we need to get out," Garrett shouted, scrambling to his feet. "We can't fight this. It's too powerful." Ilara shook her head, her eyes still fixed on the creature in front of her. She couldn't believe. Not now. Not when they had come so far. They had awakened something, and they couldn't just walk away from it. There had to be a way to stop it. They had to find a way to control it, or else the entire galaxy would suffer the consequences. "Stay focused," Ilara ordered. "We need to find a way to shut it down before it takes full control of the ship." But as soon as she spoke, the construct's voice echoed throughout the chamber, deep and hollow, like a distant thunderclap. "Intruders, trespassers, you awaken the fury of the ancient warlords. Prepare to face judgment." The voice was mechanical, but there was something chillingly human in the way it carried itself. It sounded like it had spoken these words 1,000 times before. The voice was not just a recording. It was a part of the relic itself. It was sentient. Ilara's heart raced. The relic wasn't just a weapon. It was a judgment, a reckoning. This was what had been hidden all this time. Something so powerful, so dangerous, that it had been locked away for eons. She took a deep breath, her mind working quickly. They had no choice. They couldn't stop it with force. They had to outsmart it. "Garrett, "Find me that control room," she said, her voice sharp. "There has to be something that can override this relic. Look for a failsafe. If there is any chance of stopping it, we need to find it now." Garrett nodded, his face pale but determined. "Understood, Captain. I'll get to work on it." As Garrett rushed to the back of the chamber, Ilara remained frozen, her eyes locked on the ancient war machine. She could feel its presence in every corner of the room, its power almost suffocating. The ship was no longer just a haunted relic, it was a weapon that had been waiting for the right moment to awaken. The hum of energy continued to grow louder. The relic was waking, and Ilara realized with growing horror that if they didn't stop it soon, it might not just destroy the ship, it might destroy everything in its path. The galaxy had just woken a sleeping giant, and now it was coming for them. The hum of the relic's energy continued to intensify, reverberating through the walls of the abandoned warship. Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. Each pulse of the machine felt like a countdown to something catastrophic. The air in the room had grown thick with static, and the once dead ship now seemed to pulse with life, its dark corridors vibrating as if the vessel itself was waking up from a centuries-long slumber. Garrett was moving fast, his fingers flying over the console as he attempted to override the systems locking him out. His face was tense, his brows furrowed in concentration. But no matter how hard he tried, the systems were rejecting him. The relic's energy was too powerful, too ancient. Each attempt to bypass its defenses only resulted in more resistance. "Captain, it's not working," Garrett shouted, his voice tinged with panic. "The systems are locked. We're not going to be able to stop it from inside." Ilara's gaze was fixed on the construct, which stood motionless for a brief moment, as if analyzing its surroundings. Its glowing eyes flickered, and the deep rumbling voice echoed again, sending chills down her spine. "Judgment is upon you. The Ancient Ones return." The words seemed to hang in the air, filled with the weight of centuries. Ilara could feel the ship's entire structure vibrating under the pressure of the relic's power. The machine's hands twitched again, as though testing its limbs, preparing to move. "We're running out of time," Ilara muttered, her mind racing. If Garrett couldn't stop it from the console, there was only one option left: reach the core, where the relic's power was being channeled. But the thought of getting any closer to it filled her with dread. The construct's eyes glowed brighter, a bright, neon green light that nearly blinded them. Suddenly, the massive figure began to move. Its gigantic frame creaked and groaned as it shifted. Its limbs, stiff from disuse, began to stretch and bend, the once dormant machine now coming to life with a terrifying mechanical grace. "Everyone, get back," Ilara shouted, her voice rising over the noise of the ship. She motioned for her crew to retreat toward the rear of the chamber. The last thing they needed was to be caught in its path. But even as they backed away, the construct's movement was so fast, it was nearly impossible to escape. It stepped forward with a power and speed that belied its ancient, decayed appearance. The floor beneath it cracked as its weight shifted, and its glowing eyes fixed on the crew, cold and calculating. The walls of the chamber began to shudder as the relic's power surged. Ilara could feel the air grow colder, the energy in the room thick with tension. This wasn't just a machine. It was a weapon, and it had only one purpose: to destroy. Garrett stumbled back, eyes wide in terror. "It's coming for us." Ilara's eyes darted toward the control room door. She had to make a decision fast. There was no way they could defeat it by brute force. They had no weapons capable of hurting the construct, nothing that could withstand the energy it was unleashing. She needed to get to the core, find whatever mechanism lay there that could stop it. "Follow me," she ordered, "to the core room. Now." Without waiting for a response, Ilara turned and sprinted down the dark, twisting corridor, her crew hesitating for only a moment before they followed. The ship's walls trembled with every step the construct took. The entire warship felt like it was alive, reacting to the ancient force it had awakened. The corridor seemed to stretch on forever, the dim lights flickering above them as they ran. Ilara's breath came in quick gasps, her heart racing with fear and determination. She had to reach the core. There was no other choice. If they couldn't stop this machine, if they couldn't shut it down, the consequences would be beyond anything they could imagine. They rounded a corner, and Ilara saw the entrance to the core room up ahead. But as she approached, a loud crash echoed behind them. The sound of metal scraping against metal made her stomach turn. The relic had followed them. "Move faster," Ilara urged her crew. Just as they reached the core room's entrance, the ground shook violently beneath them. The construct had caught up. Its massive frame loomed in the doorway behind them, blocking their escape. Its eyes locked onto Ilara, and its mouth opened to reveal a jagged metallic grin. "No escape. No mercy," the voice boomed, deep and menacing. The walls groaned under the weight of its presence. Ilara's pulse raced. She could feel the power emanating from the relic. There was no way they could outrun it, and there was no way they could defeat it head-on. It was a machine built for war, and it had one goal: to annihilate. In that moment, Ilara realized something. They weren't just dealing with a weapon. They were dealing with a force of nature, something that had been crafted to bring destruction on a scale no one had ever seen before. The ancient creators of this relic had known the power it possessed, and now it was time for it to fulfill its purpose. But Ilara refused to give up. She had come this far, and she wasn't about to let everything end here. With a deep breath, she turned to Garrett. "Find a way to overload the core," she commanded. "We have to turn its power back on itself." Garrett hesitated, looking at the construct that loomed over them. But then, with a look of determination, he nodded. "I'll try, Captain. But we don't have much time." Ilara turned back to face the relic, her heart pounding in her chest. The battle for survival had just begun. The sound of Garrett's fingers pounding on the control panel echoed in the tense silence. Ilara's mind raced. The relic had already proven its immense power, and now it was only a matter of time before it destroyed everything in its path. She could feel the oppressive energy from the core room, the same energy that had brought the warship to life, now threatening to tear them apart. "Come on, Garrett," Ilara muttered under her breath, watching the massive construct with unwavering focus. The machine was still at the entrance, its glowing eyes scanning them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Each step it took caused the ship to tremble more violently, as if the very structure was beginning to collapse under the weight of its power. "We need to act fast," Ilara said, her voice sharp with urgency. "The longer we wait, the more power it will gather. This ship wasn't just built for destruction. It was built to be unstoppable." Garrett's face was pale as he worked, sweat dripping down his forehead. "I know, Captain," he replied, his voice strained. "But I need a little more time. These systems were meant to be accessed by the original crew. Nobody has touched them in centuries. I can't get through all the firewalls fast enough." The relic's metallic feet clicked on the floor as it began to move again. This time, its motions were deliberate, as if it were calculating the perfect time to strike. Ilara's pulse quickened as she watched it approach, its massive form casting a shadow that seemed to swallow up the entire room. The eyes locked onto her once more. "You will not stop what has been set in motion," the voice rumbled, shaking the very walls. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. She couldn't let it win. She couldn't let the galaxy fall under its ancient wrath. A sudden idea sparked in her mind. If Garrett couldn't override the core's systems, maybe they could use the relic's own power against it. The ancient creators had built this machine, but they had also built in a flaw. Every machine had one. There had to be something they could exploit. "Garrett," she called out, her voice filled with determination. "Can you access the weapon systems, override the core's self-defense protocols, and redirect the power back into the relic? Maybe it will cause a feedback loop that will destabilize it." Garrett's eyes widened in realization, and for a moment, he stopped typing. "That might work," he said, his voice shaking with hope. "If we can trigger the core's energy surge at the right time, It could overload the system But before he could finish, the relic lunged forward. It moved with terrifying speed, its long metallic limbs extending like tendrils toward them. Ilara grabbed Garrett's arm, yanking him back just as the construct's hand slammed into the control panel, sending sparks flying and the room shaking. "Get away from the console," Ilara shouted, pulling Garrett toward the other side of the room. They'd barely managed to avoid the construct's grasp as it twisted its body to follow them. Its glowing eyes now burned with an even more intense fury. The battle between them and the relic was a deadly game of cat and mouse. With each move, Ilara felt the ship's power shift, the hum of energy growing louder. The warship was alive with the fury of the ancient past. But the more it activated, the more the ship fought back. The floor beneath their feet cracked, and alarms blared in the background. The walls seemed to pulse with every movement of the relic, as if the ship itself were reacting to its presence. It was clear that the core wasn't just a power source. It was a dangerous, unstable force. And now, they were fighting against it. "We can't keep running forever," Garrett said, his voice low and strained. He was staring at the relic, his eyes calculating. "We need to make a choice. We either overload the core and risk destroying the entire ship, or we let the relic destroy everything in its path." Ilara didn't hesitate. "Do it," she ordered. "We don't have another choice." With a deep breath, Garrett rushed back to the console. He began furiously typing again, sweat soaking through his uniform. Ilara kept her eyes on the relic, knowing that every second counted. She could hear the growl of its mechanical voice grow louder, each step it took bringing them closer to the edge of destruction. The relic's voice filled the room again, this time with more anger, more authority. "You cannot defy the Ancient Ones. You cannot escape your fate." The ship trembled violently as Garrett worked. Sparks flew from the console as he frantically bypassed the last few systems. He glanced up at Ilara for just a moment, his face pale but resolute. "I'm almost there," he shouted over the noise. But as he spoke, the relic took another step forward. Its eyes locked onto Garrett. It was closing in on them, its massive body towering over them like a nightmare made flesh. Then, with one final, desperate push, Garrett slammed his hand down onto the console. The ship shook with a deep, resonating roar. Lights flickered. For a moment, there was an eerie silence. And then the core surged. The ship shuddered as the power flowed back into the relic, feeding it with its own destructive energy. The relic's body froze for a moment, its glowing eyes dimming, as if caught in a feedback loop. The energy in the room surged, building to a terrifying crescendo. Ilara held her breath, watching as the relic's form began to flicker, its massive limbs twitching violently. The power was overwhelming, and it was beginning to turn on itself. The core was unstable, and the relic was caught in the heart of it. "Get out of here," Garrett shouted, his voice filled with panic. "Now." Without hesitation, Ilara grabbed him and yanked him toward the exit, her heart pounding in her chest. They had no time to waste. As they ran, the ship shook violently, and the sound of the relic's struggles echoed through the corridors. The energy was reaching its peak, and something was about to give. As they reached the door, Ilara cast one final glance over her shoulder, watching as the relic's form flickered and collapsed in on itself. Then, in a blinding flash of light, everything went dark. The darkness was deafening. Ilara could feel the oppressive silence pressing down on her from all sides. She had no idea what had happened to the relic, to the ship. All she knew was that the power surge, the feedback loop, had triggered something that felt final. The air was thick with tension. The hum of energy that had filled the warship's corridors was now gone, replaced by a heavy stillness. "Is it over?" Garrett's voice was barely a whisper beside her. His hand grasped her arm, his grip tight, like he was still trying to make sense of the chaos they'd just barely escaped. "I don't know," Ilara answered, her voice steady but filled with uncertainty. She scanned the pitch-black hallway, her senses on high alert. The ship was silent, too silent. She had the distinct feeling that something was lurking just beyond their vision. The air smelled faintly of burnt circuits, of a battle fought and unfinished. They moved cautiously through the darkened halls, their footsteps echoing through the empty ship. Each step seemed to amplify the tension. Each corner they rounded revealing nothing but the dim glow of emergency lights flickering on and off. Then, out of the silence, a low rumble echoed through the floor beneath them. It was like the ship itself was groaning, shifting, waking. "Ilara." Garrett's voice broke through her thoughts, filled with urgency. "Look." She followed his gaze toward the massive screen embedded in the wall. It flickered to life, revealing a chaotic array of flashing symbols, incomprehensible codes scrambling across the display. And then, in the center of the screen, words began to form. UHAVEDUVOKEN Warship. The message was not a warning. It was a declaration. The warship, or whatever remained of it, was no longer a forgotten relic. It was something far more dangerous, something alive. The lights overhead flickered once more before they turned bright, almost blinding. The ship seemed to respond to the energy coursing through it. Ilara could feel the walls vibrating under her hands as she gripped them for balance. Garrett stepped forward, looking at the screen with a mix of disbelief and awe. This is it. This is what they were afraid of. But before Ilara could answer, a heavy sound, like a distant explosion, rocked the entire ship. The warship was coming back to life. And this time, it was angry. "Garrett, we need to leave." "Now," Ilara said, her voice sharp with urgency. Her instincts screamed at her to run, to escape whatever monstrous force the warship had become. But she couldn't leave just yet. The true nature of the relic, the power that had remained dormant for centuries, was just beginning to reveal itself. And now, the galaxy would know what they had unleashed. The floor beneath them shifted again, and Garrett stumbled, nearly falling to his knees. "The core's not fully stabilized," he gasped. "It's feeding on the ship's energy, growing stronger by the second. If we don't act fast, it will reach full power." Ilara's heart raced as the realization hit her. The warship wasn't just a weapon. It was a vessel of destruction, capable of annihilating entire fleets, and they had just activated its core. They had given it the power to rise again. "We need to find a way to destroy it, or we're all dead," Ilara said, her voice cold with determination. "This ship can't be allowed to leave. If it does, it will tear through everything in its path." Without another word, they sprinted down the corridor, their footsteps pounding in unison as the ship seemed to come alive around them. The walls groaned with every step, as if the very metal of the ship was alive, shifting with the force of the relic's awakening. "We can't stop it alone," Garrett said, panting. "We need backup. We need the fleet." Ilara shook her head, her mind racing. They had no time to wait for reinforcements. The warship was already on the move. She could feel the vibrations in the ship growing stronger, as though it was preparing to launch. They were running out of time. In the distance, they could hear a mechanical whirring, growing louder. Something massive was moving. Something far too powerful to be ignored. Ilara stopped, her eyes narrowing as she searched the dark hallway ahead. The air seemed charged with anticipation. "It's coming," she said softly, almost to herself. Before Garrett could reply, the ship's control room door burst open with a violent crash. The relic had found them. Standing in the doorway was the same machine, the same towering force that had caused all the destruction. But now its form was different. It was larger, more powerful, its eyes glowing brighter than before. The relic's voice filled the room once again, but now it was not just a threat. It was a promise. "You cannot escape the authority of the ancient ones. This worship will bring about the galaxy's end." Ilara's heart pounded in her chest. The relic was no longer just a weapon. It had become the embodiment of destruction. The ancient power, fueled by the ship's core, was now unstoppable. But they couldn't let it win. Not now. Garrett, do you have anything left in the system? Anything we can use? Ilara's voice was urgent, her eyes scanning the massive warship in front of them. Garrett didn't answer right away. His fingers flew over his console, the tension in the air thickening as every second counted. Finally, he looked up, his eyes wide. There's one thing. If we can overload the core from here, we might be able to destroy it. But we need to be close to it when it happens. Ilara's pulse quickened. The only way to stop the relic from destroying everything was to sacrifice themselves. But she had no choice. It was the only way. Let's do it, she said, for the galaxy. And with that, they charged forward, ready to face the ancient weapon that would either bring the galaxy to its knees or bring its final fiery destruction. As the warship advanced, Ilara and Garrett made their move, determined to end the nightmare they had unleashed. The future of the galaxy hung in the balance.